It's not that people are overworked. They're exhausted from misalignment. They're exhausted from being on the same call multiple times, or they're exhausted from the number of meetings with no progress.
You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience podcast. I'm your host, Cory, and today I'm talking with Bill Dwoinen, Chief Revenue Officer at Mural, who brings more than 20 years of experience in scaling revenue teams. Prior to his current role, he held key leadership roles at powerhouse companies such as Slack and Salesforce, where he was responsible for driving growth, leading global teams, and developing sales strategies focused on long-term success. Outside of work, he's passionate about community engagement. He mentors students, teaching business skills to help shape the next generation of leaders. Bill, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the very humbling introduction.
You're welcome. It's clear you've had a tremendous career, so I'm excited for the insights that you're going to share with us today. But let's go back to the start of it, right? Let's begin with your journey. Obviously, you spent more than 2 decades leading high-performing sales orgs, companies like Slack, Salesforce, LinkedIn, now as a CRO at Mural. What initially inspired you to get involved in this world?
Yeah, it's such a great question. One of my favorite stories to tell. I think what's really cool, you mentioned like me spending time with students. I think what's really cool to see is like universities have sales programs where they really prepare students for a career in sales. But when I rewind back to when I got into sales, it was not an industry people wanted to go into. There was this perception that it was a used car salesman. I have to get the suits with like the patches on the sleeves. It wasn't really an industry people knew a lot about. And so like a lot of people, like the moral of the story is a lot of people, you stumble into it. And that was me. I was, at that time, it was, you had to have your forever job. And so I was obsessed with this career. I started at the Chicago Board of Trade. I was a clerk. I was checking trades. That was like my dream job. I thought I'd do it forever. That didn't go that direction. A lot changed there and I didn't know what I was going to do. And one day a buddy called me up and said, listen, my company is looking for salespeople. I said, go away, leave me alone. And he said something that really changed the trajectory of not just my career, my life. He said, you have a great work ethic and a great attitude. You can learn the rest. And that was so true, Cory, because my first job was actually selling carpet cleaning supplies and restoration equipment. So it wasn't like in SaaS. It wasn't, somewhere that connects to where I am today. And so it was literally selling carpet cleaning products, restoration equipment, machines. And I told this story to someone else a few weeks back is how I learned that sales was for me, but I knew that industry wasn't for me because when I was doing demos of carpet cleaning machines, I was plugging in the hoses the wrong way. And so that's how I knew like, okay, I sold the machines. I demoed it wrong. So I think I have this whole sales thing, but not in this industry. And that's where I pivoted to what was really one of the first players in the job board space at careerbuilder.com. And on that journey, that's when it became clear of like, yep, I'm in the place that I need to be in, whether it was from the ability to execute on the controllables, which I think is so critical, and then loving a scoreboard. I played baseball in college, always super competitive. And you can't shy away from the fact that when you're in a sales or revenue type role, like you have to kind of gravitate to the fact of like, there's a scoreboard, there's clear metrics, and I want to be held accountable. It's not for everyone. I don't think it's necessarily, something that is, people think that it's fairly easy. And when I do talk to students, I talk a lot about, this is how I got into sales. And I tell that story. Then there's a whole nother story of, this is how I've done it for 20 plus years because it's a different path. But yeah, I always like sharing the story of how I got there. And I don't think it's an atypical story for people that started their sales career at the same time I did, where you kind of end up there, where now I think it's super intentional because of great companies like Mural, or you can start your, career at a place like Slack or LinkedIn, some of the places that, you mentioned, where for me, it was like, do you want to go work at Morgan Stanley? Great company, amazing company. But when you think about sales, you're like, I'm not going to ask my friends to sell insurance. And that was kind of the perception of sales back then.
Yeah. And it's such a great point. over in Europe, they've had a lot more higher education around sales, for more than a decade, whereas we're just catching up, value selling. We participate in two programs at U Michigan and the one at UC Boulder, but it still feels kind of rare. I feel like, unfortunately, that perception persists, right?
Yeah.
That you really don't need it's not a skill-based profession, or it's not something that can be taught, but I think it emphatically is. And it's funny because you're not the first CRO to come on the podcast with a similar story, which I think goes to show, how that mindset kind of carries through. So speaking of, you said, that's my background, but it's very different from the answer to the question of, well, how have I done this for the last 20 years?
Yeah.
So let's dive into that a little bit. How do you think the sales leadership landscape has changed since you first got into where you are now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one more thing on your previous comment too is you're right. Like it's not, when I talk about my career journey, I talk about that working at Career Builder for 12 years taught me how to sell, because there is a learned part of running a true sales process. And if you look across the industry of people that grew up at Career Builder, you see them in very similar roles because they have this so well-defined sales process, but they also had the intangibles. It's not one or the other. It's like there is a skill to it that you have to learn, and that's a big part of it. And so when I talk about my journey, it's like, okay, so I learned how to sell at Career Builder. LinkedIn really taught me how to be thoughtful and strategic and really more of a human. Like Career Builder was kind of the boiler room back in the day. A lot of people from Wall Street, a lot of people from, selling copiers, I wanted to be a part of a true sales culture. But then at LinkedIn, you're like, well, wait, you can do both. You can be a great sales leader that brings rigor, but also be a human and be compassionate and be thoughtful and strategic. And then I always say a Salesforce and Slack was just execution, being able to execute at levels that to this day, I'm still proud of and bring over here to Mural. But, to your question, I did this panel yesterday, and I love the answers from other CROs, because your question, I'm going to give you an answer that it's almost more of the same. And so my first leadership job was maybe 16, 17 years ago. And what I always talk about, whether it's in these forums or with my team, is that we're in this true leadership moment of, can you actually lead? For the sellers, it's more of, hey, the pandemic cycles are over. You have to run truly authentic sales processes. You have to be in the field. You have to do discovery. You have to do value selling. Just because someone's overconsumed on a product doesn't mean they're going to keep it. And so a lot of the back to basics and sales processes are there, and the same thing for leadership, and especially with the data we have in front of us today, whether it's through AI or, great RevOps teams, that, the leaders that say the generic things like, we have to go generate pipeline, we have like all the obvious things like that, they're going to get passed by. It really is the leader that can be strategic, the leader that can execute, but more than anything, Cory, the leaders that can be in it with their teams, that are out in front of the business. And I said this, I think the panel was yesterday or 2 days ago, the week is kind of blurred, but I said, like, we can't shy away from those people being called sales leaders. Everyone's trying to finesse their title in the LinkedIn world, but it's like, you are a sales leader, which means there's a selling component to it. And so what I'm most proud of with our leaders here at Mural is they're all in front of the business with customers, coaching their reps, walking that fine balance of like being involved, but also scaling processes to your team, right? I'm sure you hear this from other people of like, the super AE leader that tries to be in every account. And so it really is fundamentals and being close to your business. But then also the most important skill, Cory, is not forgetting that a big part of your job is coaching and developing. And what I have seen more than anything is there's some reps that have been very successful, and not to their own fault, but they haven't ran a deal with no compelling event, or they haven't really had to negotiate. And so just being able to coach and develop, whether it's early career or people in the strat space. And so to put a bow on it, it's being close to your business, leading with data to form your opinions, being close to your teams and your customer, and truly leading, right? Whether that's how you run the business versus manage the business, and then how you help your teams. And I said this yesterday, is that I think it's way more fun to be a frontline leader in today's world because of all the analytics you have, because of the resources you have. You don't have to wait for a report from RevOps. I mean, that's such a critical partner to us, but you can do your own sort of deal risk reviews. I mean, I'm probably a power user. I'm one of our top 3 users of AI at Mural, and same thing with my team. And so I just think it's way more fun and way more strategic, but you have to lead and you have to be with your customers and be in it with your teams.
Yep. Incredibly well said. And I loved how you touched on the leadership aspect of compassion and being in it with your teams. It's funny, I'm working on several award nominations for clients right now. And one of them, I think that they had the most change in 6 months that I've heard in a long time, right? Whole new processes, people in, people out. But 10 months later, they just had fantastic metrics. And I was talking to the sales leader the other day, and I said, one, how you did it, I've got the technique of it, but how did you bring people along for the ride? How did you make sure that everyone just didn't walk up out of that meeting and go out the door and never come back? And his response was, I brought everyone with me.
Yeah.
And the way he did that, he said, for the first month, I just listened. And then we did personality assessments. And then I tailored my communication differently to everyone on the team. Different emails, different Slack messages, different, one-on-one coaching. And that just kind of blew my mind, because that's something that I feel like we don't talk about a lot. It's easier, it's more concrete to focus on the numbers, especially in conversations like this. But I'm so glad that you dived on that leadership aspect of it, because I think it's crucial.
It is. And also too, it goes back to what I said as far as like the copy and paste leadership, or the leader that forwards everything, right? Like, leadership is not forwarding emails, or, leadership is not, we have to do this because it matters to our CEO. Like, leadership is owning it. And I do think, for me, coming in as a new CRO, right, to an organization going through transformation with a new leadership team, it doesn't matter what your role is, whether you're a frontline leader or a CRO. There's a delicate balance of going on a learning journey, but then there was also things that I had to do right away. I knew there was things where you're like, okay, like, I will meet you where you are, I will learn, but these are things you're going to have to come with me. And I think one of the things I'm so grateful for with the leaders I have around me is I pull them into everything. Like, we're going through planning for next year, we're going through org design conversations, we're strategizing on our outbound approach and new logo approach. And I think it's a win. It's a win across multiple areas. And I'll come back to one other thing you said, is that, number one, they're so close to their business and you want them to be a part of it. Number two, one of the perks of working at a more agile company is there's not 37 layers of decision. So if you don't unlock that capability, it's a miss. And so we don't have 7 layers between me and my frontline leaders. And so it's easy for us to create this round of collaboration. And then they feel like they're truly, truly playing a role in growing the company. And so I've seen it not only be like super helpful to me, I have seen how they have leaned in to feeling a part of the company, because the people get into leadership because they want to make an impact and they want to feel a part of something bigger than themselves. I think one of the first rules of leadership is we versus I. Like, you remove the letter I from your vocabulary. And, Cory, one thing you said too that is really powerful about you can be two things. And I've said this before, is that it doesn't take leadership to be candid. The best leaders in the world are candid, but then they also provide support. And I'm sure you've witnessed this throughout your career, is it's not hard to give someone feedback. Hey, Cory, go generate more pipeline, right? Or, hey, Cory, you have to be better at doing discovery. The great leaders and the leaders that will be successful and the leaders that will be CROs one day are the ones that are like, you know what? It's a miss, but let's do it together. Let's role play. Hey, on the next call, I'll lead discovery. You learn, do it back to me. Let's practice. Like, I am here. A lot of my leadership principles come from my father, who was a maintenance worker that coached baseball for 30 or 40 years. And he created these high performing teams really around 2 to 3 core principles, which were people always knew where they stood, but they also felt supported. Like managers are good at the first one. Managers are good at giving feedback, but the leaders are great at bringing people along to help them get there, because with the way the environment's been the last 4 or 5 years, like selling to demand is not hard, right? When you have different challenges with negotiation, like things like that. But I've worked with some really, really talented reps and leaders that, not to their fault, just haven't gotten a chance to run different types of motions, whether it's new logos or, different products. And so it used to be where like, oh my gosh, the strat reps are the best and the strat leaders are the best. They have all this experience. The climate has changed so drastically where there's not one single person I've come across in the last few years, regardless of level, that doesn't need coaching and help. And so the managers will be the ones that just give feedback or like, say the general things like create more pipeline. The leaders will be the ones that create a path forward and also bring them along to make them better.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And speaking of leaders, I want to shift gears a little bit because, Bill, you've talked a lot about go-to-market alignment. And at the risk of sounding simplistic, I kind of want to start with a definition because it's one of those things that, it's like being customer centric or customer obsessed, right? Like every company in the world is going to say that. Every, marketing, sales, product leader, they're going to say their go-to-market engine is aligned. But then, you put them in different rooms and you ask them the same question and you're going to get wildly different answers. So, what does go-to-market alignment mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I kind of even joke about it. Like I love the work we're doing has been great. What we're building is amazing. The narrative we're telling is great. And I think part of the narrative, Cory, is that it's always been out there. I've been in sales for sales orgs for over 20 years. There's always been misalignment, or there's always been teams working in silos. And so, in the effort of trying to avoid sounding cliche, like the way that I think about it and the way that I think there's like three inputs, right? Like what we're building here at Mural, what we've observed. But then when I talked about the teams I've been a part of, the broken part of alignment is when it happens in a moment of time. The true definition of alignment is consistent alignment on outcomes throughout the journey of X. And so let me unpack that for you a bit. So if we're running a sales cycle with a new logo account, we might be aligned on one call, but then everything falls apart before the next call. Or teams go work in their own corners. Like, I learned a ton working at Salesforce. And one of the things I learned in some of these bigger deal motions, you would have between 20 to 30 people is part of these account teams. And it's the same thing at companies like Oracle and ServiceNow. And everyone, you'd be on these calls, but then everyone would go work in their silos. And not only were teams misaligned, and that's where collaboration drag comes in, burnout comes in, it also created a pretty cruddy customer experience. And that's what we're realizing is that when you have consistent alignment throughout a journey, you close deals faster, you have happier customers. And I don't think that we need more meetings. And I think what happens is people think that like collaboration and alignment are two different things. And we have to separate the two. Collaboration just means like we're talking, we're talking about a certain deal, but are we truly aligned and marching towards the same outcome? And I'll give you one example, Cory, is that, when there's misalignment throughout a process or even a customer journey, think about, I'm sure you've heard this in your tenure of, customers get frustrated when they get new account reps every year. In part of that, there's just no alignment in the organization of what's happening across a customer. And so what we're trying to solve for with our GTM teams and what we're building is not just consistent alignment throughout the course of a customer journey, it's ensuring that everyone's working together in the same place in a visual way. And so I'm really proud of the journey we're on, and what we're learning has been fantastic. And, when you're a part of it, it's magic. When you're on an account team that works consistently. And I think where organizations struggle is they have it for a moment of time. And when you look at more extended deal cycles, whether because of size, complexity, SKUs, new logo deals take longer, the more teams that are involved, the longer the cycle, the messier it gets. And so whether it's like you're deep into a deal and a business value team jumps in, and now they have their own point of view, or you're in kind of a new logo discovery and you're 4, 5, 6 meetings in, the deeper you go, the more stuff gets lost, the more it's hard to keep up with. And then the customer, I'm sure you've heard this before from other people, is, this is the 5th time I've had to explain myself to you all, or, things like that. And so it really is going back to what I shared is, alignment towards outcomes, but not in a moment in time, just throughout the journey that you're on with a customer for the entire life cycle of it.
I like the distinction too between collaborative and aligned, because I think you're absolutely right, Bill. A lot of people think, oh, I prefer to be collaborative, and that means talking. And we can do that all day, right? That's easy. It takes some energy, but that's the low hanging fruit. But then actually being aligned on the steps that you're going to take to accomplish X, Y, Z, time bound, measurable, that kind of feels like a different thing. So if there's a revenue leader out there right now listening that is, the gears are turning and thinking like, okay, we say we're aligned, but are we really? What are some of those first warning signs that you've typically seen over the course of your career that mean that you're kind of headed for trouble?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one more thing about the whole like collaboration versus alignment. We salespeople inherently sign up for work. And, they have great, they work a lot, they travel a lot, they're in the field, like there's not really set hours, like you're on when your customers are on, there's still work to do, the danger of kind of always being on through laptops and cell phones. And it's just, we're all always connected more, right? It's a thing. It's not that people are overworked. It's they're exhausted from misalignment. They're exhausted from being on the same call multiple times, or they're exhausted from the number of meetings with no progress. I think one of the most dangerous things in corporate America is the people that are like, well, I'm back to back all day. And to me, that's scary. Like that is not necessary, but that has been defined as like a badge of honor, right? Of like, I'm sure you've seen people like, wow, I'm back to back all day, I must be really busy. That is not good. Like that doesn't mean that good work is happening or you are aligned. And so I think some of the signals that I've experienced and I've witnessed is when you do feel yourself in collaboration dragon cycles. And that means that you find yourself kind of talking about the same things all the time, or nothing changes between calls. And so if we're progressing a deal and, we don't necessarily have like some of the matrix orgs I've talked about that have 30 SKUs and 10,000 salespeople, they have deeper account teams. For us, we have a salesperson, a CSM, a technical person, some leaders, but even with 3 or 4 people working on account teams, when I find myself showing up in meetings and like, wait, we haven't progressed anything, or when you don't see any sort of ownership on action items, that's my first red flag. So I'm on a call, and if I jump on like a deal call, whatever it is, or even like our leadership team is great at this, if you don't see ownership and action, that's red flag number 1. If I show up again and the same things are being talked about, that's red flag number 2. And then when I hear from a customer, that's like the biggest one, but you try to avoid that. And that's where I was I grew up in sales, right? So, using homegrown CRMs to PowerPoint to more of the legacy, I've always been ahead of the curve with embracing technology and things like that. Dating back to when people didn't think that mobile would be a thing. And now with AI, like I'm always ahead of the curve, but I never worked in a tool like Mural. Maybe we had some stakeholder maps that you would throw in a PowerPoint or Lucid or Mural, but now I see what it's done for our teams to bring this visual component to alignment and action. And that is what I see our teams moving fast. And that's what we're bringing to market, this philosophy of this problem has existed with GTM teams for 20 plus years, and bringing this visual component is a big part of it. I could see it, I could act on it, I could follow it, and I can jump in, I can form an opinion without talking to anyone. And the great thing is I don't get like the 30 tags and documents anymore. And I'll give you an example of that. When I was in some of the larger deal motions, at previous companies, there'd be like 17 active documents we'd be working in. There'd be Word, there'd be PowerPoint, there'd be Canvas, there'd be Quip, there'd be someone liked Excel, there would be a bill of materials here and there. And it was just, and it was tool of choice. And so bringing our teams together in a more aligned way has made a huge impact. But those are some of the early signals, right? Are like, Are we surfacing action? Are we making progress? And then are the teams engaged? And I have a good like engagement meter is that you jump on a call and you're like, wow, these teams seem defeated. Let me see if there's like, are they in this collaboration drag where they feel like they're just in the same cycles and nothing is moving?
Yep. And I'm really intrigued by 2 points that you made. One, the point that maybe people aren't overworked, they're exhausted because of the nature of the work. That's a really novel idea. And two, I almost want to call it these tiny collective delusions, for lack of a better word, that we operate with it. Because you're absolutely right. I was talking to someone the other day, and they got on a call like, "Oh, I've been back to back," and you could tell like it was almost a badge of honor. I mean, I myself like, "Oh, wow, this person must be more important than I am." You know what I mean? It's a little subconscious thing in the back of my head. So I'm kind of curious, what other, maybe cultural ticks have we all gotten used to, right? That maybe are kind of robbing our energy and causing that misalignment that we really don't notice.
Yeah, it's I'll take it a few different ways. I think as it pertains to collaboration, you nailed it. Is, the back to back, like, and this was before COVID, before people working remote, before, I mean, this has always been a thing. You would see those people like, oh my, I mean, they would answer the question like, how are you today? Like, I'm back to back. Like, it's like busy person syndrome, right? Like the need to show that they're busy. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had super productive days that were back to back. And yet that's especially as a CRO. I mean, every day I have is back to back, but we work to ensure it's productive. We get to action. I have working blocks, for that reason. And so I think the like badge of honor of being back to back is there. I think one of the things I'm trying to do is like bring synchronous collaboration back. And so what happened a lot during the pandemic, because different time zones and just people have a lot going on, is that everything became async work. And remember, I was working at Slack, right? So of course, everything was async work. And what I've realized is we've had to clarify, like, what are the things that are great for async work? Like, I just got off with a customer. What a great way to send a recap to the account team. I recorded a quick video, gave them some notes. That's fantastic. It is not meant for like forecast calls or, escalations and things like that. And so I think going back now, not everything has to be a meeting. You have to be mindful of that, but really defining what are the things that should be synchronous, like talked about live so you can get to action. And what are things that are great for a Slack post, right? Like every few days I'll go in there and say, we have this many deals. Like, that's great. That's awesome. But you can't do things in an asynchronous way, whether it's email, right? There's no such thing as a 30-person email is a productive 30-person email. And that's where, I've been lucky enough not to be in email now for almost 5 years. So I'm kind of spoiled with a bit more organized communication. But I do think that that's a big part of it of, I'm going to send you an async update on that. Like, no, you're not. Like, we are going to find time to talk live. And then I'll kind of, so that's, I think with the way in which we work that's a big part of it. The other one that I saw that's a big one in sales, and I always have to, be mindful of this because I did grow up in a world where, your enterprise reps were in the field 3 days a week. Like, I'm not saying we're going to go back to that, but just bringing back some of these very fundamental things that have always made salespeople successful, like being in the field, doing discovery, doing lunches and dinners and, things like that. And on this panel the other day, every CRO said the same thing. And they were asked, hey, what's the most important sales skill for someone in 2026? And you thought the answer would be AI, AI, AI. It wasn't. It was like getting out in the field, doing better discovery. And all that peels back to, Cory, is going back to running authentic sales motions.
Yep. I think you're absolutely right, Bill. And it doesn't, from my perspective, at least, it doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, right? We all have the AI tools now to be incredibly efficient, which, is very tempting from a sales leadership perspective, right? I think people are always kind of chasing efficiency gains and things like that. But, I think you're right. To be truly effective, people are craving that authenticity because now everyone is being inauthentic in these small ways that we're just kind of getting, that's saturating the environment a little bit. Okay, so we talked a lot about, misalignment, the things that get in the way of our work days, that, ruin collaboration, good intentions, kind of zap our energy. But shifting the conversation and moving towards solutions now, you've spoken a lot about aligning on customer truths. From a practical, more actionable perspective, what does that mean as far as, taking product marketing, sales and CS leaders and actually having them do an exercise that forwards that way of thinking?
Yeah, it's a powerful question. And for us, I mean, we're all what I love about what we're doing here is like we all are working to get closer to our customers, right? Whether our CMO is on calls, our CPO is on calls, our CEO is on calls, our marketing folks are listening to gong calls. Like everyone is trying to, get a better understanding of our customer base. And a lot of it is just defining the ways in which you work. Everything has been chaotic, and we're really getting to a place where we are defining the way that we work in really methodical detail, right? Whether it's the way we want to operate in QBRs, the way we want to create feedback loops. I'm very proud of our alignment across, sales, product, and marketing, the revenue org included of CS. And we just have really had to define, because what was happening, Court, we were guilty of it too. Like we laugh about this of like, we all came in pretty new, to the company. We all are going so fast. We see the opportunity, we see the excitement, but we found this, we were doing a lot of like async updates, or I'll send you a Slack on that or record a clip on that. And so we really had to take a step back and define our operating cadence, the way in which we want to communicate, what are expectations of our teams, I'm always revisiting feedback loop, right? Like our CMO and CPO are amazing with kind of activating this feedback loop. And so it really comes down to just defining the ways in which you want to work. And that has changed the way we operate here, of just being clear, because again, it goes back to feedback. Like we had customer feedback living in 13 places. That's a bit dramatic. It was really like 4 or 5. And so, hey, I have feedback from a customer. It's in an email or it's here or there, but it's like, are you actually collaborating on? Another example today is we had someone submit some feedback. It was really positive. My first question is like, how does this get in the hands of marketing? Okay, there's another opportunity for us to define something. And we're all on this learning journey. I mean, it's been a year for me, and my learning journey has just started. Every week I learn something new that I just have to prioritize. And it's exciting, whether it's about our customers or about the opportunity for us to work closer together. But it really is just being clear and defining the way in which you work. And alignment doesn't mean meeting. It doesn't mean that, I meet with my CMO once a week. I meet with my, directs once a week. It goes back to like one-on-ones, like as far as leaders. It's like, I have one-on-ones, check the box, but was it productive? Did you bring something to the table? Was there mutual action items? And so I think internal alignment is no different than customer alignment, as it's not communication, it's alignment, action, and ownership.
Yep, I completely agree. So let's say we get it right? We harness those feedback loops. They're running across the org, right? We go from CS back to marketing. We're creating all these brand advocates. Everyone's happy. What are some of the metrics that, you personally, Bill, are tracking and you would expect to see trend in the right direction before the other ones?
Yeah, thank you for going right into outcomes. A lot of times people are just like, oh, we get along more, we meet more, and so on and so forth. And so, for us, a big part of activating the customer feedback loop is to drive growth and retention, right? And so if we want to be better at, making sure feature releases go to the field, it's so customers are aware. So we don't walk into meetings being like, a customer saying, oh, I had no idea I can turn on AI. And this is happening everywhere, right? The speed, your comment earlier about the amount of change. I think the point that I've gotten to, especially the last 18 months, it's the pace in which innovation is happening and the pace in which things are moving. Change is not a once a year thing anymore. Is you have to, like, what we do here is we move fast, we test, we learn, we move faster. And so, you have to be able to be that agile. And so, when I look at the ability to activate our teams on creating more awareness in the market, it's to drive growth and retention rates. It's to accelerate close rates on deals, right? So if we have a more unified approach internally and we create better customer experiences. And so outcome number 1 is obviously just overall bookings, and then retention rates. Is that, unfortunately, my last 4 or 5 years, I actually got going back like 10 years now, there's been situations where you catch yourself and a customer is like, well, I didn't know that I could do X, Y, or Z. Wow, this is an opportunity for us to get better. And so we want to make it where customers have everything they need to make informed opinions about what they're doing, because every dollar matters now, whether you're a big company, a small company. When you're investing in software, you have to justify everything and feel good about it. And so the importance of that feedback loop is growth and retention, because not only does it help with what gets in the hand of customers, it helps ensure that product is shipping, to what the field needs and shipping to what customers are asking for across consistency. And so that to me is, I'm a little biased as a revenue leader. And so looking at those outcomes, that's a big one. Then you have things like, NPS scores. You want to make sure that customers have a great experience. But I am seeing, when our teams are humming, we're seeing close rates, 30, 45 days on smaller deal sizes. We're seeing, inbound picking up a bit, leads coming in from all the different events we're doing, and just the way the teams operate. Like, wow, what a great experience. And every call that I've been on, and let me be clear, like I'm on some escalation calls, where whether it's commercials or, customers, we have such loyal customers that, push us to, ship fat, like all the things that make companies great, right? It really is the customers that helped us play a role in all the great things that we're doing. But on every call that I'm on, it's always like, I have such a great experience with your team. They show up well, they show up informed. And, that is hard, because how do you measure that? How do you measure the fact that the customer always feels like your team is aligned? They don't have to repeat themselves, but it comes back to retention, growth, NPS, and, just overall enjoyable conversations, which I love. I love the hard ones too, but I think we see that in our interactions with the field.
Yep. Great answer. All right, Bill, as we move toward the end of the podcast, there are two questions that we ask every guest. And the first is, if you were looking back 5, 10, maybe even 15 years and could give career advice to your younger self, what would it be and why?
Oh, I'm going to give you two answers, which I'm not a rule follower. So let me give you two answers. I subscribe to the fact that you have to connect the dots looking backwards. And I am so proud of where I am. I'm so happy with where I am and what I got to experience. And all those choices led me there, right? Like moving to New York when I was, afraid to leave Chicago, and getting that experience and getting to work at all the different companies that I worked at. And so when I look back, the advice I always give kids is like, life is not a straight line. Like you have to put yourself out there. And, I've been through 10 rounds of layoffs the last 5 or 6 years, 8 reorgs. Like it's never as linear as people think. So people might say, oh, you're a CRO, or you have your own podcast, or you work at this company, and everyone thinks that it's linear, and it's not. And so I always say I'm as proud of the bumps in the road and the mistakes I made. And, I think when I was at LinkedIn, I'll come back to this and give you a real answer. I think at LinkedIn, I was so ready to go back into leadership. I may have picked the wrong job. I think it was more of like, I want to be in leadership, but that job not only got me a great mentor and a great friend, it set me up for, like, there was learnings from it. But the advice I would give, like, so that's that's like a wholehearted, and anyone that knows me won't be surprised by that answer. But the truth, like a more kind of like real answer, in again, I was saying the truth, but a more like concrete answer is, I grew up in a very humble background, very blue collar family. And so early in my career, it was almost like, wow, is this really happening? I'm going to just be the guy that, hey, if they call you and say, move to New York, do it. If they call you and say, we're going to create this team, do it. Like, just be that guy that, like, hey, go play. Like when I was playing baseball, it was like, go play left field. Be like, sure, put me in, coach. I want to play. But I think when I look back, and that's okay, because it was my upbringing, and it was just such a wild ride from like shy introvert to where I am today, and where I was when my career took off a bit. But I would have been more intentional around the path of, where do you want to be in 10 years? When I was younger in life, I was so ignorant to that question. And it was like, well, tomorrow's not promised, or I'm going to just enjoy it. Where I think 10 years ago, and I wouldn't trade anything for the world. But if I said, hey, I want to be a CRO in 10 years, that may have set me on a different path. Now, my path has been amazing, and so I wouldn't trade it for the world. But the advice I would give people earlier in their careers, or even at this phase, like if I want to be a CRO of a $10 billion company one day, I have that vision now. But for me, I was always the person that said it and then did the work. The challenge today is people are like, they want to do that, they don't do the work. And so what I would have done differently, and the advice I'd give other people, is don't shy away from the where do you want to be in 10 years. And one of the quotes I live by is like, when you aim at nothing, you hit with tremendous accuracy. And so it's better to say you want to be a CRO in 10 years and maybe not get there than just be that kind of like feather floating around at the end of Forrest Gump, where you're like, I'm going to go left, I'm going to go right. Like I zigzagged a lot, where I spent 5 years in solutions where the experience was amazing, but it took me away from like just what's in my DNA in sales. And so I think having that level of clarity of I want to do this, but then to combine them together, it's enjoy the ride, just enjoy. I am so proud of the things that went well, and I learned more from the things that didn't. It's so cliche, but everyone says that, of like, from the things that didn't go as planned, if those didn't happen, I wouldn't be in the spot that I'm in today. And so you can have that clear vision, but just enjoy the zigzags that are just part of, careers in life. And if you encounter bumps in the road, it means you're trying. It means you really are putting yourself out there and trying to do things that are maybe a bit beyond what you're supposed to be doing.
I love it. Enjoy the ride, but at the same time, our reach must exceed our grasp, so to speak.
Yep.
Okay, a final question for you, Bill. So we're recording this in December of 2025. Fast forward 5 years, say we're in December 2030. What do you think will be going on then, particularly in the revenue leadership space, that not a lot of people are talking about today?
I'm going to go 2 answers again. Hopefully I don't know because I'm on a beach somewhere. No, I'm totally kidding. It's, I'm going to contradict myself here, and I don't even know. I mean, 5 years out, it's so wild, right? With how fast that we're moving. We subscribe at Mural, and I subscribe personally to, human-centered AI drives better work. And so I think we're going to enter this era of unprecedented efficiency. And I'm not joking. We just got the dashboard for our like ChatGPT licenses. I'm the #1 user of it. And it's put hours back into my day. It's also been like, I actually asked it, hey, what are the top 3 ways I use you? And it was like thought partner. It was like all the things that you do. And so I do think we're going to be on the path of unprecedented efficiency. And I also think we'll find this way of somewhere in the middle, right? I don't think it'll ever go back to like the heart. Like I said, when I was, my first, enterprise sales job, it was like your suit and tie were next to your cube because you'd be in the field like every day. And so I don't think we're going to go back to like the 150 cold calls a day and the hardcore leadership. But I think we're going to find this blend of some of the core fundamentals that drove sales organizations and sales facing teams with this continued focus on intelligence, data, and compassion. I think everyone has learned you can hold people accountable, but be compassionate. You can do 2 things at the same time. And so I really do think it's going to come down to the fact of like, we're going to be way more efficient. We're going to be way more intelligent. We're going to all have AI alongside of us. Like that's not going to be in 5 years. That's today. We're going to have more clarity on how to use it. And we'll land in this blend of maybe some of the older school sales processes and metrics of accountability with this like sales is an art, leadership is an art, revenue operations is an art.
Yep, I completely agree. And I love the point that, accountability and empowerment and compassion, those do not have to be mutually exclusive things, right? They can all kind of blend together.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said earlier, as far as like, you can be direct and give feedback, but you better do it with coaching, or like you can be, I'm surrounded by people that want to be held accountable. Like you don't have to remind them of that. I think people need it, but they also need clarity. Like it has to be both of like, I don't think you can hold people accountable without giving them clarity and support. Because otherwise you're a dictator, right? Otherwise you're just like barking orders. Is that, it's that mix of like, I'm going to give you clarity, I'm going to give you support, and hold us accountable to it. And I'll kind of close with going back to your question on leaders, it's like leadership is mutual accountability. And I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by leaders up to our CEO and throughout my career that accountability started with them. It wasn't just the sales reps. It was like they take this ownership of truly owning their business, and it starts with them as the pace car.
I agree. All right, Bill, this has been a lot of fun. If people want to learn more about you, more about Mural, where should they go?
Yeah, so they can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty active, whether it's talking about the industry, running marathons, my experience with students. And then, I do share a lot about where we're heading with Mural, and then mural.co for all the great things that we're doing, especially around GTM teams.
All right. Thanks again for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Cory. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays.
You too.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.